Hello and welcome to the 2016 Sonoma County Pit Count Training. My name is Christina and I'm going to be going over some of the essential information to know for the pit count on Friday, January 29th. So first off, I wanted to start with a little bit of an overview of what we'll be talking about here during the training. I'll go over a little bit about the purpose of the pit count and why it matters and what information it will be giving us. Next, I'm going to talk about some of the logistics and what to expect on the day of the count. Then we'll go over the tally sheets and how we actually do the count. And then I'm going to finish up and talk about some of the next steps and reminders for what to expect when you show up. So, the purpose of this count. Why are we here and what are we doing? The reason why we do this count is because the Department of Housing and Urban Development, which we refer to as HUD, requires this point-in-time count of every homeless person, and this count happens in the last 10 days of January. Right now, the unsheltered counts are required and mandated by HUD every other year. However, they have been encouraging counties to try doing this count annually, and this is the first year that Sonoma County has opted in to do an annual unsheltered count. So we're pretty excited to be a part of this, and we thank you for being a part of it as well. The counts are going to be happening all over the country, and this time period of the last 10 days of January are chosen in order to minimize double counting. Double counting is a term that we'll talk about throughout this presentation, and I'll explain a little bit later on. So I want to talk a little bit about why this count is so important. It is a way for Sonoma County to increase their understanding and awareness of homelessness in Sonoma. And most importantly, we're able to generate valid and accurate data that the county can then use to report back to the National Department of Housing and Urban Development, as well as report to the local programs for policy planning and strategic planning in order to get funding. Now that we've talked a little bit about the background and why we're doing this count, I'm going to start getting into the logistics of the count. So the pit count has three main components. The one that we are going to be training for and that you will be participating in is the general street count, and that is happening Friday, January 29th at 6 a.m. And then in addition to the general street count, we also do a youth count, and that's conducted on the same day, January 29th, but that is later on in the afternoon, and there's a few different reasons for that, but that's mainly because we find that youth who are experiencing homelessness are out and about later on in the day, and we're able to get a more accurate count then. The other component that you see listed first is the shelter count. The shelter count is conducted on the evening of January 28th, and that is where we work with the local shelters and we get a number of how many homeless individuals they have staying in their shelters on the evening of January 28th. The shelter count, like I mentioned, is counted on the night of the 28th, and that also plays into why we conduct our street count so early on the morning of the 29th, and that is to avoid double counting individuals. We want to capture them while they're in the shelter, and we want to avoid double counting them when they leave the shelter, which is why we begin at 6 a.m. The third and final component of the pit count is a survey, and that is conducted in the 2 to 3 weeks following the actual count on the 29th, and that is something you guys won't be participating in, but we just wanted to let you know that is the third and final step of this process. Through the survey, we are able to get a sample of individuals experiencing homelessness, and with that we ask them some questions and we're able to find out a little more information about what's going on, why they feel they are homeless, what services they need, and that information is given to Sonoma County and used in order to get funding for services and programs. Next, I want to talk a little bit about the definition of unsheltered homelessness. So the pit count uses a narrow definition of homelessness, and that's why I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about it so we are all on the same page on the day of the count. The pit count is one of many different strategies the feds use to understand homelessness and allocate funding for services. The definition used for the pit count is limited. However, this process is just one piece of the puzzle. By focusing on a specific population with specific needs, we can really focus on getting the job done and help to ensure understanding of homelessness and to receive funding. So I'm going to go ahead and just read the definition word for word so that you know exactly what it is. Individuals and families who lack a fixed, regular, and adequate nighttime residence, including individuals and families with a primary nighttime residence that is a public or private place not designated for or ordinarily used as a regular sleeping accommodation for human beings. On this next slide, we list out a few of the specific examples that are included and not included in this definition. So you can see on that list that things that are included are places like people living on the streets, people living in cars, people who have found, temporary shelter in abandoned buildings, airports, camping grounds. Those are all the kinds of places when you see these homeless individuals on the street, that would be included as a homeless person. Not included through this definition are people who are couch surfers, people who are living in double-up situations. A double-up refers to, for example, two families who are living in a house that's meant for one, or if you have 10 people in a one-bedroom house that's meant for, 2 to 3 people. Other places are most jails or prisons, people who are awaiting eviction, people who are in mental health facilities or in rehab. So that is a little summary of our definition of homelessness, and now we're going to move on to talk about the logistics of the actual street count. So the street count is a visual count, and we want to emphasize this because it's very important that when you are out there on the streets conducting this count, that we are not actually engaging in any conversation or bothering the people residing on the streets or in parks. That's A, for your safety, and B, just to be respectful of their environment and their lives. And just to note again, the street count is going to begin at 6 a.m. and the reason for this is because people are still in the public shelters and we want to use this time in order to avoid duplication or double counting. One note to make here that I'll talk about a little later on is when you are assigned your census map area, if you have a map that is near a shelter, we want to have you go to that shelter area and count people around the shelter first, and that's another effort to avoid this double. Next, I want to talk a little bit about our volunteers and homeless guides. Our homeless guides are paid $10 an hour for their expertise. They are paid for the training in addition to the time that they are out during the count. All payments are made on the day of the count. So in order to get paid for training, you must show up to the count, the day of the count, and participate in that. And that happens at the end when all tally sheets are turned in. Volunteers are not actually paid for their time or reimbursed for their mileage. We thank you so much for your participation and helping out in the count. Now I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what to expect on the day of the count. We ask that everyone arrives to your deployment location no later than 6 a.m. Well, there'll be a lot of people and we'll want to get everyone out as fast as possible. So we ask for your patience and participation in the process. What to expect? You'll arrive. Generally, we'll have some snacks, a little bit of coffee. And first off, we have some paperwork for everyone to complete, and then we'll do a quick review of safety protocols. We'll go over the forms. We'll answer any questions. And next, we'll create teams, and these will be the teams you'll go out and spend the morning with and count the homeless individuals on the street. There will be teams created of one volunteer and one homeless guide. Sometimes teams are a little bit bigger than that with a couple of volunteers. It'll just depend on how many people show up on the day of. We will then distribute the street count packets. This will include your maps and the tally forms. We'll give you a clipboard. We'll give you some pens or pencils. We also give you a printout of some of the training guidelines and we'll give you some stickers to wear so that when you're out in the community, people are aware that you're participating in this count. And lastly, we'll make sure to share our contact phone numbers. Um, Again, this process can take a little bit of time, so we ask for your patience in order to get everybody paired up and out as fast as possible. Then the teams are out into the field. We want to make sure you guys are covering your entire map census area, which I'll cover in the coming slides. And then as soon as you're completed, you have completed all your forms and finished your map area, you will head back to the deployment site. We ask that everybody returns no later than 10 a.m. If you feel that it's going to take longer to cover your map area, we ask that you call us and check in with us. Throughout the count, definitely by 10 a.m. we'd like to hear from you if you're going to be later than that. Here we have a slide that is a sample map. So I just want to note that this isn't necessarily a map that you'll be getting in the area that you're covering. As you can see, it's the Cotati and Roanoke Park area. However, this is just a sample we're using, and this is exactly what a map will look like that you'll be given. The area inside the yellow kind of gold line, the thick gold line, is the area that you will be covering when you are out in the street. It is very important that you stay within the gold line. So just for a quick example, if you're on a street and you see somebody on the other side of the street that is not inside your area, that is somebody that you wouldn't count. We would want to make sure, again, this is an effort we use to make sure that we are not double counting. So it's important that you're only covering the area inside the gold outlined route. Another thing to note when looking at this map, we ask that you cover all areas of your map. So that means going up and down every street. If there's a park, we ask that you get out of your car and walk around the park. Depending on where your census map area is, you might be down by a river, you might be up in the mountains. If that's the case, again, we ask that you get out of your car and walk around. This is where we're going to rely heavily on our homeless guides. We ask that our homeless guides work with our volunteers, and you guys discuss as a team the best route to go, the best places to get out and walk around. We also ask that you remember to be safe and only put yourself in safe situations. Again, rely on your homeless guides. That's why we hire them. That's why they're here, and they have proven to be very successful and helpful when covering our map areas. The next important thing that I want to cover when talking about the map area is that each gold inside map gold area has its own tally sheet. So some teams will be given more than one map, which means that you'll have, a few different tally sheets. When this is the case, it's important that you only mark on the tally sheet that is corresponding to the map number. So you can see on the bottom right hand corner of this map is a map number. The census tract is 1512.03. So that means you need to make sure on your tally sheet, which you'll see example in the next slide, that you are marking each individual according to that map number. Another thing to note that I want to point out here that's very important are the jurisdictional boundaries in this map. So as you can see in this map, there's two different colors. There's a shaded kind of light gray, and there's also a white color. And you will have a tally sheet for each of those areas. So for map 1512.03, you'll have one tally sheet for the gray Cotati area, and then you'll have a second separate tally sheet for 1512.03, the white area. It's important that you pay attention to where you see each homeless individual and that you mark them on the correct tally sheet. This is an effort that Sonoma County has been making in order to get accurate and valid numbers based on the jurisdictional city and county and unincorporated areas. Next, I'm going to show you what the tally sheet looks like, and that might help explain a little bit what I mean by these separate tally sheets for separate areas. Here is a slide that shows the tally sheet. So if you look at the top, there are numbers and the jurisdiction name. So this is all information that will be filled out prior to you receiving the tally sheet. But again, this when you see the map number 1512.03 and then the jurisdiction Kotati, this is where you're going to want to make sure that you're paying attention to the correct tally sheet. If you see a person in Kotati, you'll put them on this tally sheet. If they're in the unincorporated white area of that map you saw on the previous slide, that would go on a different tally sheet. You will have a tally sheet for each separate jurisdictional area. This is something that we'll cover on the day of deployment, so since you are participating in an online training, we hope that you will ask us any questions you have on the day of deployment when you show up to your deployment center. So now I'm going to talk about how to fill in your tally sheet. So as you can see, there are a few different categories on the tally sheet: gender, age, family, and dwelling or vehicle type. So we ask that you remember that this is an observation-based count only. We don't want you to engage with people in order to ask their age or their gender. We just ask that you work with your team, the homeless guide and the volunteer, and you talk together and make your best judgment. We ask that you make your best effort to identify the age and gender of each person you see in your route area. However, we recognize that there will be times that identifying these details will be harder to see, will be hard or impossible to see. With the weather lately, a lot of people will be covered up and bundled in a lot of jackets, maybe a lot of hats, and you won't be able to see them. In addition, if you see a tent, you won't know the gender of the person inside. So now I'm going to talk about some of the specific examples that you might see and how to fill that out. So for each individual that you see, you need one line. So this first example, if you see one male on the street, you're going to bubble in, fill in the bubble from male, and then make your best guess on the age. The three categories we use are under 18, 18 to 24, and 25 and over. Again, make your best judgment. This 18 to 24 category is one that HUD is asking us to do a special reporting on, as they are curious about the number of transitional age youth, we call them. Again, it's kind of hard to tell. How are we supposed to tell whether it's a 24-year-old or a 26-year-old? Make your best judgment. If you're unable to tell their age, mark the age as unknown. Next, you're going to mark where you saw them. That's in the dwelling or vehicle type. Most people that you're going to see are going to be on the street. However, if you see somebody in a tent, you're going to mark tent. I'll talk a little bit more about tents below next. The next example you see states an encampment area with 3 inhabited tents and 1 visible individual. Here, for example, you'd be walking along and you see an area with a few tents, but you only see one person. Remember, we don't want you to guess that because you see a tent, there's a person in there. We only want you to mark down tent in this case. So as you can see, the number 1, the entire first part of the line of the row is blank until you see tent, and that marks that that's one tent. Then you have 3 rows for each tent that you see, and on the bottom you do a line for the one person you see next to the tent. So we have a male, age 25 plus, and then you'll see on the far right, encampment is circled. So an encampment is defined as 2 or more tents in the area. So because there's 3 tents here, each of those is marked as being in an encampment. You won't necessarily be using this encampment column that often, but when you do see an encampment, it's important that you mark it down. Also, you can see there's a column for railroad tracks. This is if you see anybody near or on railroad tracks. Sonoma County is making an effort to note how many people are staying near railroad tracks, and that's with the addition of the SMART train in Sonoma County. Here we have a couple of examples. One that I want to go over and spend some time talking about is a family. We use the term families to refer to groups of individuals with at least one adult over the age of 18 and at least one child under the age of 18. So just a quick note on that. Through HUD, families are defined as including one minor and one adult. So a family does not include two adults together. There must be a minor present. We ask that you mark one row for each person you see in the family, and here you're going to indicate their gender, age, and location. And then you'll see, as in this example, because it's 3 people and they are a family, you're going to circle in that column. You'll circle the 3 bubbles to signify that this is a family staying together. In this example, we have a family of 3. One adult is over the age of 25, one is between 18 and 24, and one is a child under the age of 18. In this example, they are seen residing in a vehicle. This would only apply if you could make out the details of the people inside or associated with the vehicle. Again, because of the weather, sometimes you won't even be able to see the ages or know that it's a family inside the car. In that case, you would just mark down individuals and car. But for this example, we see it's a family, 3 people. You can tell their age and gender, and you can tell that they are in a car. So you would circle that, and that signifies a family. Next, we have the example of an inhabited vehicle with the details of the people inside unknown, like I was just talking about. That's going to look like this line. The entire row is empty except for car is filled in. This applies to an RV or van as well. You would just mark RV van. Remember, we don't want you entering into any cars or vans, knocking on the door, asking how many people are staying in there. However, in the case that your homeless guide knows somebody living in one of those cars, it's okay for them to talk to them, but please don't enter or talk to anybody in the cars unless you have knowledge of who they are. One final thing that I want to mention about cars is, in order to prevent duplication of cars, counting cars, we have on the back of the tally sheet, which you'll see in the next slide, we have a space for you to write the last 4 digits of the vehicle's license plate number. Here I want to note and remind you that this count is completely anonymous. We are not recording these vehicle license plate numbers for any reason other than to prevent double counting this car. Because cars are a lot more mobile than people, it can be likely for these cars to move from one census map area to the next. So by having you guys write down the last 4 digits of the license plate number, we're able to ensure that we're not counting the same car twice. So in the next slide, you can see what that looks like. Here is the back of the tally sheet. So you'll see for the first car you see, you'll put the last 4 digits of the license plate. There's a column in the middle for any information, other information you want to write about it. And on that right column, that's just for internal use only, so you don't need to worry about that. So that is a recap of everything that you will need to know for the tally sheets and the maps. Again, I would imagine that you have questions and you are going to want a little bit more information. So we will be happy to answer questions on the day of deployment, and we will be ready. Here on this slide, I'm going to talk about a little points of safety. We really ask that you guys use your best judgment to stay safe on the day of the count. Again, don't approach any individuals. This is observe only. Stay with your teammate. Talk to your homeless guide. Use each other to make decisions together. We want to remind you to be respectful of those you are counting. If people come up and would like to talk to you and you feel comfortable, please go ahead and talk to them. But also remember that we are observing their living areas. Call your deployment center captain if you have any questions. We'll give you that phone number on the day of the count. And if there's ever a true emergency, please call 911. In the many years that been doing this count, we have never had any emergencies or issues while out in the field, and that's why we continue to use this process and rely heavily on us guides and volunteer teams. A couple things to note in order to make sure you're fully prepared for the day of the count. You should wear comfortable shoes and clothes. We do this count rain or shine, so make sure that if it's the forecast is calling for rain, that you have rain jackets, rain boots. Like I mentioned, you might be walking around outside a lot, so it could be muddy. You want to have comfortable shoes for that. Bring a car. So as we rely heavily on our volunteers to bring cars, so we recommend not carpooling with friends. Please bring your own car. Bring your cell phone, bring a flashlight if you have it, and dress warmly. We start early and it's been especially cold this winter. So lastly, just some of the next steps. You'll be updated via email with any new information. You can contact the 2016 Pit Count hotline, which you'll see the number listed here. If you have any questions, you can email sonomacount@appliedsurveyresearch.org. Applied Survey Research is the nonprofit organization working with Sonoma County on this count, and we're the ones putting on these trainings, and we'll be there on the day of the count. Thank you very much for your participation and listening to this presentation, and we really look forward to the day of the count on Friday, January 29th. Thank you very much. Look forward to seeing you.